Hello. Well, here we go. Um, I'm going to start with the sky. As you can see, the final painting is, well, I should say the wash-in or block-in is completed and dry. That's important. Usually you want to work on a dry surface, and this surface is taking the paint very well. I'm using for my sky cerulean blue, titanium white, and a little bit of ultramarine blue, just to kind of cool it down. Um, as you can see, I'm painting right over there's a little fir tree up there, and now I'm just working in a cloud shape. Um, the day was kind of hazy, so you really there's no big puffy clouds or anything. There's a little glare in the water right to the upper left-hand corner, and right along the horizon line, I'm just adding a lighter version of the sky color. It's not exactly white. I don't want it to look like overly done. And I'm just going to work in some of the edges in there just to soften it up. I try to keep the skies relatively bright. Um, I can always go back and darken them later um, if need be. What I try to do is have the backgrounds as light as possible, and then get a little darker in my foreground just to give the painting a bit more depth. Um, this whole painting, even though it's sped up considerably, it's about 52 minutes thereabouts. And so now I'm working in the water. The only difference here is that I'm using a bit more of the cerulean blue, and I also added a little viridian just to give it that little greenish tinge. Okay, the ocean definitely has more green than blue, uh, especially that day, which just indicates that the water is very clean, not a lot of bacteria. So, now that was I'm using, okay, I brought that up. That's just basically linseed oil. I just wanted to show that. That is my medium. So I'm adding a little bit of that to my paint just to move it around a little bit. Sometimes what happens is the underlayer or the block in that we did. Sometimes that could get a little not sticky, but it can kind of cause the paint to um, not really flow all that well. You'll see there was some time that went by before I painted the rest of the rocks. So the sky and the water were actually cleaned on the next video. Well, it's actually the same video, but a little later on, you'll see that I go over the whole canvas with just a very thin film of the linseed oil. Um, that's optional. I just like to have something, the surface to be a little bit more pliable. You can get, it doesn't drag the brush all that much. So here I'm just trying to refine the background a little bit more, a little of the water. There are some light infractions where it gets a little bluer and then it gets a little, little lighter. In this case, we're going a little light. Excuse me for that little shake there. The camera's like right in front of my head, so it gets a little tricky to navigate around that. All right, so now I'm putting in some little waves. It wasn't really a turbulent surf. Now, if you guys want to exaggerate, by all means, make it a little bit more exaggerated. I wish we did have a little bit more of a wind that day. That would have provided a lot more interest, but I think it's an interesting painting on its own. I think the bluffs there, which are supposedly, well, they're the highest in Maine, and they happen to be on this island that's about 40 minutes away from the mainland. Um, yeah, so we're working in a little bit more tone. I really want to anchor that horizon line, so I'm going over. The brushes I'm using, if you want to know, uh, are basically these are sables now. So all the brushes that I use from now on in this painting will be sable, with the exception of a few flat brushes, which are nylon. So, because of the lockdown, I wasn't able to get to the art store, so I used some of my acrylic brushes, which are just fine for oil. In fact, they were in good shape, so why not? Um, I think I mentioned this in class, but a lot of people ask artists what are their favorite brushes, and normally if you paint a lot, the answer will be the one that the brush that behaves. Okay, because you can get some expensive brushes, and if they're a little too old, or if they weren't treated properly, they can just be as useless as a dollar brush that you can get at any drugstore. So yeah, so be careful. It's you don't have, you want to get good stuff. You want to get good brands of your brushes, but sometimes I always buy a few nylon brushes when I'm at Blick's or Michael's. Uh, if they look good in the store, I never buy brushes sight unseen. It's just the way I am. I need to see them. That's why I've never bought the rosemary brushes, although I've seen people with them. I've painted with them. I need to see the brush, and I don't want to go through the whole hassle of returning brushes if I don't like them, even though they do give you a guarantee. Um, so I'm adding a bit of a shadow shape on the front sides of the rocks, which would have been basically the bottoms, and that's going to be all kind of fused together. Now here, I'm not, even though I'm not painting the rest of the rock, I am painting a little bit more of the solid color. Here I want to try to get a feeling of where those colors are going to be. And so there's almost like a moss that grows on the rock. Now that color, you're probably wondering, that's simply that's a mixture of viridian green and burnt sienna and a little bit of the yellow ochre. If you don't have yellow ochre, you can use cadmium orange. Would do the same thing basically. There seems to be like a little water running over that rock. Maybe it's like an opening. Maybe the wave just hit that side. Yeah, so you'll see I'm using some of these little brushes every once in a while, but for the most part, this brush um, was, let me get that brush. Um, that was a Utrecht Sablette brush, and they're made in India. They're actually very good, and that was a flat. So, and that was a number 4. Okay, I have a 4 and a 2. I think, yeah, and there's another one. I just can't read the name of it, but there's a cat's tongue brush that I have. Very soft. This is actually better for portraits, but every once in a while I'll use it for landscape. I just prefer using flats, especially when you're painting rocks. You can really edge them, and you don't have to do too much. Rocks are relatively flat. They have sharper edges. So to paint them with filberts is sort of um, you're going against the shapes. It would just create rounded areas, unless you want your rocks rounded. That's fine, but they're not. So you want to try to fit the brush with fit the brush for the job. Meaning, if you're painting people or you're painting objects, like in a still life where you need to draw and move the paint around. That's what the filberts and the Egbert brushes do. Egbert brushes look like filbert brushes, but they're longer. Okay, that's the only difference. Those are great for portrait painting. They're very expressive. You can load them up because they're very long. The flats or the brights are excellent again for painting, because you can basically chisel a lot of the surface, and so these rocks are again very jaggedy, and even though I don't think I used a little brush. It was actually, here it is. It is a number 2 Escoda, and it is basically, just a liner brush. All right, so here, moving on to the next day, I am going over everything. Now you can almost see there's a little shine. Unfortunately, in this video, well, maybe fortunately, so we can actually see the shiny. Now, the paint is now prepared for painting. There is a very, very light bead, which just simply means it's a film. It's not a buildup, okay? So don't think that you have to put so much. In fact, I was actually trying to get more paint off, okay? The thing that happens here is when you put that film over, make sure that your first layer is completely dry, or else you'll have a big mess. So I actually waited probably 2 days before I actually painted this part, the bluff. The water was dry, and we're going to go back into the water later too and add some more embellishments. In fact, even after this video, one of the questions in the class is, when do you know a painting is done? And usually it's when you feel you've done just about everything that you feel the painting needs. If your criteria for painting is to try to paint as photographically as you can, well, you know that you're done when everything is completely noodled and rendered to the nth degree and it looks exactly like the photograph. And then you could say, well, there's no more I can add, and that's it. Well, if you're not painting that way, if you're painting more in a brushy, whether it's impressionistic or it's just a looser technique, that's a little harder, because you have to make decisions that are different than the person who is creating the painting and recreating a photo image, or painting very, very real. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a beautiful technique when it's done properly. You have to know what to edit, what to put in. But as far as someone doing a painterly, and this painting is kind of somewhere in the middle of the two. It's realistic, but it's the brush strokes are a little looser. I'm not getting into every little nook and cranny. So my criteria to finish a painting is when everything looks like is in harmony with the other shapes. And then sometimes what will happen too is, after you're finished with a painting, like, put it away for a while. Like, and when I mean put it away, put it to a point where you don't see it. Because you can get used to looking at a painting, but out of sight, out of mind is probably a better situation that you want to be in, because when you go back and look at the picture without seeing it for a while, you may see things you didn't see because you'll have a fresh eye, so you will be more objective the second time around. And then you could create or add, because a painting is never really completely done. I mean, this painting is now dry, um, well, at the end, and but that doesn't mean the painting you're done with your painting. That just means that you can come back and revisit and rework if you need to. So some artists do like to come back. They like to glaze a little. They like to do more scumbling. They can add more texture, and just the same. Um, Even if you feel that the painting is done, let's say you feel like, wow, I came back, I had the painting turned against the wall, and all of a sudden I see some major problems that I didn't really see in the beginning. Well, you just oil the painting down again, and you just start going in into those areas that need changing. And chances are, as you're working, you might see other things happening. Plus, working like this painting, basically, after the preliminary wash-in was established, or block-in, um, I created the lights and the shadows. But now I'm basically working wet into wet. I mean, this is going to be, when I worked on this painting, it was one painting session that you'll see that I go from here. There might be little breaks in between, and that was only because I had to stop my camera because it met its limit. And so even though those breaks are happening, they're all happening during the same day. You will see that I do change the light. I move the light that's glaring on the top right-hand corner. I think in the next video, the next clip, which is just continual, you won't see that, and you'll be able to see more of what I had painted up there. In the photograph, that's probably a more I don't know, more of a colorful area up top of the top of the bluff. And now I'm just adding, okay, so the colors that I'm adding, I'll slow down here. Basically, I've just been staying in these areas simply with ultramarine blue and burnt umber. And occasionally I'll go to the cadmium red just to get a little, I don't know, like a little purplish color. And you'll see that I don't stay in one spot too long. Once I have that paint on, I like to bring it in other areas. And here I'm just basically blocking in. Now talk about not caring, well, not being too concerned about the quality of the brush. The brush I'm using now happens to be a Zen brush that you can get at Michael's. The reason why I'm using this one, again, because I couldn't get to the store well, I just couldn't. I didn't know which one, if they were open, whatever. But that was a big flat. That was, I think, a number, I'll tell you in a minute. Here it is. So, yeah, so that one, that's actually, I don't know, it's a number 4, but it's big. It's a Zen Royal Langnickel. And it's probably, I don't know, they say it's probably more like an 8. Some of these sizes are really weird, but I would say it's somewhere around an 8. And I needed something a little bit bigger. The reason for that is I don't want to be, tickling around. If you hold on too long to a small brush, chances are you're going to go into detail too quickly. So the idea is to try to stay with a larger brush and then work your way down. You'd be surprised how much you can put down with a larger brush, and how small areas you can get into if you manipulate it and angle the brush in certain ways. Here, so that darkest dark basically still is ultramarine blue and burnt umber. In fact, that's really the majority the darks. All right, so here we go. Now we're moving. Oh, sorry about the bouncing here. But all right, so I don't know what happened there. Okay, I think I got a little upset or something. I kept hitting my head against that area. So now you can see the top right-hand corner. Um, these are the truer colors. Okay, so now you're seeing the colors in there. There's some. Now I did introduce a little bit of the viridian green and sap green into the rocks. There's probably some vegetation or something there that worked in. And now here, these crevices. These crevices are basically the separations between the two rocks, which is basically a crevice, and there's some areas that get a little darker. There's some um, planes of those rocks that are completely moved away or not facing the light whatsoever, and they're kind of turned in, so they get darker. All right, so they're sort of like probably the furthest plane from the light, which will create a very dark shadow. Now here, that color that I'm putting in here is almost the same color as the water, or at least the water along the horizon line, which was cerulean blue, viridian green, and some white. That one happened to have a little bit more ultramarine blue. I wanted to try to keep the bluish parts of the rocks, or at least the cool parts of the rocks, more along those lines of a cerulean, ultramarine blue, white, and in this case, I added a tiny bit of the viridian green. Okay, just to keep some life going. I don't want these shadows to become too dense. So that's why there's paint added just to give some texture. So that's really what I'm after. And here just more crevices. Now this, I could probably have used a smaller brush, but I did not. And the reason why I didn't is because I didn't want to get too linear. Again, the smaller brushes have a tendency, you start noodling a little bit, and all of a sudden you have areas in your painting that look like they were overly rendered, because you basically use, when you use a round brush, you start to draw with the paint, and you're not painting. You're not laying the paint on it the same way. So be careful of that. It's good when you need, to draw lines and paint, a little detail at the very end. But be careful during the process. Always try to keep your brushes larger. And in this case, since we're painting these crevices and these crags, you want to try to keep that brush as planed off, flat as possible. Okay. Now here, I actually just lifted off some paint there because there was this little, like a buildup. Now, unfortunately, the one thing you could do, I have a tendency of putting a lot of paint down when I do my block in or wash in. Okay. Now the reason for that is I want to get paint down. However, be careful of like the last part of what you do in the wash-in. Some artists will take a fan brush and knock down any ridges because they really don't want to see anything come through. Plus, they don't want to have that extra texture. Me, on the other hand, I kind of like having that texture because that's going to add to the texture of the preceding layers. So that's what you want to try to do. You want to try to keep that texture there, especially in landscape painting. Now I don't do that when it comes to portraits. I keep that surface as smooth as possible, knowing that I want to, if I want to blend, if it's a woman's face or a child, you want to try to get nice soft gradients, and you don't want to have too many ridges in the face. Um, okay, so now there's a bit of light on the side of that little, kind of right in the middle. It's just a little bluff that's just peeking out and grabbing a little bit of light there. I mean, it's interesting. So now, more color in that shadow. I'm trying to keep the separation of the light and the shadow areas defined. So I'm going in a little darker, just showing that corner edge of the rocks. This way, I retain that hard separation between light and dark. And I'm talking about that shape that has a little bit of green right down the center. Um, so those are the areas that I definitely want to keep at a hard edge, just so that I would have something, keep the form going, really. And that's how you do it. You define the edges, and you'll see that be going back a lot of, over and over in some areas, just to rework some of the edges here. I want them to be, hard where they need to be, and then I want them to be almost lost edges too, where they're not really jumping out at us. Okay, so that little tan area that I was just painting at, that's really, I just wanted to narrow that down. And here I'm just basically blocking in that area, um, so that I have a bit of, a nice dark. And here, putting some more uh, highlight colors, because that really is grabbing light. That's one of the effects of this painting. It's sort of like edged light. Should I wait a little longer for that day? Yeah, maybe. I thought that it was kind of nice just to see the dark shapes, and paint things in shadow. I thought that was a challenge. Okay, so it's up to you. Everyone is different. I just happened to pick that time of day. Again, this I had already painted this painting there, and so when I showed up, I I knew I didn't have much time on the island. I really only had a few hours. So I wanted to just jump in. And what happens when you are painting plein air, you have to do everything quickly. All right, so as you can see, I am adding some top lights with the palette knife, just to get some interesting edges and texture. Okay, so that's what. Now here I'm actually working on that edge, right, of that that, that little rock formation, just so we can separate that between the front and the back, and you can see that there is like an opening there. It's a hard line separating the two forms, and that's what I'm looking for. Um, Now you can see that I'm not just using one color, right? They are variations that get a little cooler or they get a little warmer, but I try to mix things up a bit from exactly what I see. Plus, if you notice the rock pile in the distance with the one jutting out and then the one way in the back, um, it's painted a little cooler. Well, it's painted a little cooler for a reason. I wanted to feel that sense of distance there, and I kept everything very simple. I didn't break up those shapes too much. Kept everything set back. Um, yeah. And there was another little little rock formation, just grabbing a little bit of the light. All right, so now, I think I went a little bright on this one. Okay, so this is, okay, we're still at the same painting area. And now going back and starting to work on the foreground. So here I'm choosing to paint some of the top lights first, but also going back in and adding some of the shadows. So now I have to discern what I'm going to paint, and how much, well, basically how dark I want to go, but I'm also going back and reworking some of the other shapes as well. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm just trying to get the basic shapes down. You can see, and also color too. So I'm concerned about color. I'm concerned about the value, and I'm also concerned about how I have to break up this space. Now, I'm not painting every rock that I see. There's no way I'm going to do that. But I'm going to suggest the ones that I see and try to create something using some of the bigger rocks to, bring a likeness to the place. But the smaller ones that are kind of like insubordinate, or they're just not, well, not insupported, but just inconsequential. They're just there, and they're just not eating. They're little, they're little flecks here and there, and you'll see that in some areas, that's all I do really is hit the top lights just a bit. So there you go. Still breaking up the shapes there. As I'm painting, I'm trying to design where those rocks are going to be. Okay, I really want to see that feeling of there's a little bit of light in those shadow areas, but they're not receiving the same amount of light that the bluff and that little jetty is actually has on the top lights. If everything was lit the same, it'd probably be a very boring painting. So we need to have a hierarchy where the highlights are going to be, and then where the shadows are. Now here I go back. Now I'm using this is a little Scholastic pointer brush. It's basically a liner brush, and I'm going in and I'm reshaping some of the darkest dark. So now, by putting that accent line in, that really brings the local shadows, or makes them brighter. Okay, because if everything is the same value, you're not going to have any punch. So you do need to have that accent point in key areas, and that's and in this painting that's where they were. And you can add more if you feel like you want to break down some of those shapes a little bit more. You can do that. Excuse me. Now, as far as the color is concerned, this is it's kind of like a sand color. These rocks now up here were fairly dry. They weren't. I'm pretty sure they were not tinged by the water, or at least not that day they weren't. And yeah, there's that little rock that's coming out that's receiving a lot of light. It does have some of the algae, or moss, I guess it would be called. It's very unusual. They have this area, this island is extremely lush. I mean, everything grows, and it has this beautiful, pristine quality about it. It really, truly is a magical place. Plus, if I hadn't said it before, in the first video, that this is a painter's heaven. When I was there, I noticed there were 3 other plein air painters in town, and there could have been more. that I just didn't go to the whole island. And so we're seeing, okay, um, more painting. Now, this is where the artist has to start to think about designing and creating the space, the shapes that you want that are going to be, relatively appealing, right? Try to find those areas that we can see that have all those interesting color changes, but still look solid without getting, too overdone. So what I'm trying to do is tightening up some of those edges there, you noticed I added a little bit more light to some of them. Um, yeah, I want to have that feeling that light is coming down nicely on that, and it is. It has an interesting feel, and feeling the atmosphere there. Um, is still trying to get a little bit more uh, like buildup of paint there. That's where we'd have to probably come back another time and just add some more lights, little dots of on the water, because again it was a backlit sky, so there were these little tiny dots of white, that well placed lines, almost like that reflection and that uh, bright highlight on the water. Now what I'm doing here is I'm going in and I'm getting a little darker in the water. I felt the water was a little too washy. It needed some more color. And you're probably wondering what that stick is. That's actually called a maul stick. And now when I'm painting my finish, I have to be careful because I can't rest my hand on the canvas. And I'm painting on a very, basically it's a tabletop easel. Now here, I was erasing, scraping off some areas so that I can put some more paint on, lightening some areas, getting some glare in the water, because I want that to really pop out. And also, I went back and I reestablished that line, the horizon line rather, and I got um, a little bit more depth there. Okay. Um, Now there are some waves, some foam that's happening in here. Now by going back with the lighter colors, it gives me the opportunity to put a like the feeling of that the suds, the sea foam is just riled up and it's all over those rocks, which it would be. And you know, those areas of high oxidation, it's all because the waves are hitting the rocks and bubbling up there. So I wanted to, that's why I needed to get a little darker, and I needed to reestablish some of the shapes in these rocks. They might have been in the wash or the block in, they might have been maybe not as articulated as they need to be, and now's the time to finish. This is the finishing time. So here I'm going to be adding a little bit more dark, to give these rocks just a little bit more punch. Okay, so we're just adding some more shadows under the rock again, just to give it a little bit of a foundation, so the rocks don't look like they're cut out. And working on those little tide pools. Uh, let's see. So still working on coming back around, lightening up some of the shadows. Um, Notice when you are painting, try to be mindful of like working around, like as you're working, look at other parts of the painting. Don't try to stay in one spot too long. You don't want to wind up with a painting that has like an overly detailed area in one particular part of the painting and then not look have it a look of unfinished areas in your painting. So what you want to try to do is you want to try to get them um, equally finished. So this is where you have to constantly look around. Okay, so now we are almost at the end. I think we have about another 10 minutes of painting time. And so I'm working again on the foreground. I'm adding more color. I'm adding some more depth. Trying to keep everything interesting without getting overly rendered. Again, just painting what I see, and then actually kind of making up some things too, improvising a little bit, but working from the shapes. Now, you know, if we're not painting every little rock, uh, what you do is you try to get the basic shape of a rock and then work it in to the area that you're painting. So the area in the foreground here, it's a bit brighter than that darker area in the middle of the picture. So I want to try to keep these loose and lit well, but I also don't want to I don't want to get them too dark, or I don't want the shapes to be too repetitive. So always be sure that when you're painting, that you're keeping the shapes relatively different, meaning that you don't want to create the same rock if you are improvising the rocks. Okay, try to keep them as organic as possible or abstracted as possible. So that's why the underpainting helped us out when we masked everything in, and we can still see some of those areas that weren't covered over. Very few, but there's some of them are there. Um, More information as we move around. Um, the rocks. Now I'm looking for areas so that my eye doesn't go off the page, so I'm darkening some of these areas on that far low left hand corner. It actually is dark in the picture, but I wanted to make sure that that dark area kind of encroached a little further into the picture on just to the right, so it almost made this triangle. And I probably will do that too on the other side of that rock. We're seeing just the basic, yeah, that where that rock right here, where this rock is, that is the final, uh, that was the lowest point in the painting right there, right at the base of that shape. So I'm getting in there, and now I'm just adding some color because I felt it needed it. Some of those rocks were pretty sun bleached. They looked like they could have, they were mostly on the cool side, grayish blue color. Whereas this rock formation was more, I don't know, it might have had some more moss on it or something. All right, so that's why it has a little tinge of green. So all these things you have to kind of be aware of when you're painting, because those color changes are going to basically be from nature. They're not, they're not just made up. Um, you know, some of that moss looks like it's almost like a bright orange when it hits the sun, and some of it looks like it's brown. Some of it looks like it's brownish green. There's that's what really creates interest in the painting, when you have all those different colors. It just keeps the life of the picture. So be mindful of that when you paint. Um, can you go a little brushier? Absolutely. Um, this is probably my uh, probably as brushy as I'll go. Um, trying to keep it. I'm trying to keep myself from not going in and doing too much detailing. So that's always an issue for a painter, is like when not so much when you know that the painting is done, it's also when to know to stop painting a certain thing in the painting. Like, don't overwork the shapes. Try to keep everything balanced. That's why it's always good when you're painting is to constantly move around. Always move from one big shape to another shape. You know, even if they're not even anywhere near one another. Like, I could even go back and maybe paint the back of the bluff way in the distance, or just, you know, put some more paint there. So what I'm doing here too now is I'm adding some halftones. I want to start showing that it's not just a top plane and a shadow plane. You do have to at some point join the two together. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm adding some interest, make them look like it's not just two planes, a light plane and a shadow plane. There's some more. On some rocks, it's more evident. And some less. So here I'm going back in, adding a little bit more lights on the tops of those rocks in there, just for extra, you know, just a little extra punch. Um, I may even go in, because we're very close to the end. We got about a few minutes. I think what happens is I forget to paint the tree, the fir tree on the top, um, and I go back and I paint it in. So we only have about 3 minutes, maybe a little bit more. Um, yeah, I'm just going to go back. I actually started using some stand oil, and I'll talk to you guys about that in class. If you want to get very heavy, thick paint in the lights or the midtones, you use this in place of linseed oil, and you get a thicker application of paint. Sometimes that works best when you paint over. Let's say we let this dry and we come back in and we match those values. You can get some very nice effects, almost like impasto type painting, and it would look beautiful. Just don't overdo it. You know, some of these effects are great, but you don't want to overdo them. Okay, just enough to get the idea across. All right, so here we got more very contrasty here, because these rocks are in the sunlight, and we got a little bit more light there. I think I'm definitely using the stand oil here, which is really sun thickened linseed oil. You know, some people just take their linseed oil and pour it in a saucer and put a little um, uh, like saran wrap over it with some holes in, and just leave it outside, and the holes will oxidize and it'll get thicker and thicker by the sun. You don't have to do that. You can just go buy yourself a jar in any store. Michael's has it. Blick's definitely has it. All right, so going back over some of the finishing touches, I'm just trying to get some idea of where I need to go. Going back into the shadows, adding a little bit more green. I noticed that it needed a little bit more of that, because there was some algae or whatever was growing in there, in those little areas. And still looking for some contrast, right? Um, Still not done. You can tell, when an area just doesn't look finished. And here we go. So now I'm back. Okay, so the camera stopped. And actually, I stopped the camera there, but now I just go back and paint our our fir tree. Okay, here I'm using a little. This brush is really small. Um, I think this is, it's a pretty good brush too. Not sure what it is, but oh, it's a Da Vinci brush, and I think it is a 4. No, actually, it's a 2. Sorry, it's a 2. So there we go. I think that's it. Yeah, no, wait a minute. So I go back, add some more lights to it, and realizing that maybe that light wouldn't be that bright there. I was just trying to get some interest because that tree is mostly in the shadow area. So I think that's it. Well, I hope you enjoyed the painting, and I will see you guys in a few days. Bye now.